It's the winter of 1999. The town is Chicago. And imagine if this appeared in the morning newspaper. The bull, which once ruled the earth for 72 months, has suffered a mighty fall. For at the end of the 72 months, the great right horn of the bull, whose number is 23, let the reader understand, departed. And so did the great left horn of the bull. Then the third horn of the bull, which was pierced in many places and dressed like a woman, likewise departed. Then all the beasts of the earth, the timber wolves and the hornets, came and devoured the flesh of the bull, and the glory of the mighty bull was laid low. Got any interpretation on that one? Some people do in this room right now. You're an avid enough sports fan. You have enough of a memory to know exactly what this is talking about. Others of you are beginning to think, Chris, I didn't live in Chicago at that time. I'm in Nashville and it's 2015. And others of you are thinking about what was going on in the Chicago sports scene in 1999. The Bulls had come off being the toast of the NBA from 1993 to 1999. But change is in the air because three of the most prominent Bulls had departed. The first one being Michael Jordan. Let the reader understand. The first great horn signified by the number 23. Then you have Scottie Pippen, the other mighty horn on the bull. And then, of course, you have Dennis Rodman, who has piercings all over his body and liked to dress like a woman on occasion. And after the three great horns departed, the Bulls went on a terrible losing streak, and great creatures like the Timberwolves and the Hornets of Charlotte began to devour them. But unless you're an avid sports fan with a great memory, or unless you lived in Chicago during that time, the chances are it took you a little while to figure out what that paragraph was talking about. Or to put it another way, suppose somebody in another part of the world, such as Honduras, where I was just a couple of weeks ago, picked up an American newspaper, turned to the editorial page, and saw a political cartoon with a donkey and an elephant engaged in a tug of war. I guarantee you we understand that cartoon, but a Honduran looking at an American newspaper would think the Americans are raising their animals to do some very strange things. And in many ways, this is how a lot of us approach the revelation today. We approach it from an outsider's point of view, and this is where we get into trouble with it. When we pick up Revelation with all of its imagery and with all of its bizarreness, it seems confusing because we look at the images and the symbols, and the first thing we think of is for 21st century reference points. I grew up at a small private school in Austin where I was born and raised. I had a Bible teacher in the 6th grade who genuinely taught me in the class on Revelation that the flying locusts in Revelation chapter 9 with breastplates were really just Apache helicopters. And John was seeing them, but since there were no helicopters at the time, he didn't know how to describe them, hence locusts with breastplates. Believers reading Revelation in the 1st century, our brothers and sisters a couple of thousand years ago had a big advantage. They were familiar with the imagery and the symbols. There are more than 500 allusions to the Old Testament in 400 verses of Revelation. And I'm simply sharing with you, just from the outset, how sometimes we get it all wrapped around the axle when we approach the book of Revelation from our vantage points, instead of approaching it from the 1st century's vantage point. And when you begin to understand that Revelation is addressing real people in a real century, dealing with real issues in the 1st century, you're then maybe in a better position to make some applications in the 21st century. And if you can do that, you and I can be in a better position to be blessed rather than confused when we come to this book. And I use the word blessed intentionally because this is the only book in the Bible Not coincidentally, the last book in the Bible, obviously, that promises a blessing to those who read it and heed it. Revelation 1 and 3, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it. What I want to do just for the next few minutes, and it's not going to take long, is I want to throw out the welcome mat for us to Revelation. I want to help us get in a position to hear the word the Lord has for us through the next 9 speakers in our sessions over the next couple of days. When you and I read Revelation, there's a few things to keep in mind. The first is this: let's keep in mind the context of the writing. That it opens up with John reminding everybody, hey, I'm a companion in the suffering and I'm a companion in the kingdom. He's writing 7 churches. He's been exiled to an island of Patmos under the Roman Emperor Domitian, the first Caesar to claim while he was alive that he's a god. And this is at the time when the branding of Caesar is Lord is at its greatest peak. And the pressure and the persecution was rising for followers of Christ to accommodate this central conviction of the Roman Empire that Caesar is Lord. But the persecution of believers wasn't the only thing believers are dealing with. Believers are also dealing with the seduction of the Roman Empire. They're being seduced by the culture, the pursuit of luxury and wealth and pleasure and fame and power at all cost. And so some of our brothers and sisters are struggling to be loyal to Jesus in the midst of persecution and resistance. Others of our brothers and sisters are struggling to be loyal to Jesus in the midst of the seduction of the Roman Empire. Does this sound like this might speak to anybody today? And for what it's worth, when I look at all the talk and all the hype on social media today about Christians in America being persecuted, I got to level with you. I can't help but think of a couple things. I hope our brothers and sisters in third world countries aren't able to look at what we call persecution. And secondly, if I could be gut level honest with you, I think we're all more in danger of being seduced by our culture right now than persecuted by our culture. And so John has this encounter with Jesus, and the writing of Revelation is the story of what he saw that he's told to pass on to these 7 churches in the empire. And the primary purpose that he's engaged with isn't to speak to the people about the end of the world. It's not to speak to the people simply about the future. It's to speak to the people about their present moment. And a lot of times when we come to a book like this and we see it as simply a device to connect the dots so we can discern when this is going to happen and that's going to happen in the future, we're looking for Revelation to do something it's not designed to do. We're trying to bake a pie in a freezer and freeze a pie in an oven. It's just not what's going on. But the fact is, the Lord gives this word to John, not so much to help John make a chart about events in the future, it's to help him and the church make choices in the present in light of the very end of the future. Which really leads to a second thing to keep in mind, and that's the type of writing. You think for a second about the different kinds of writing there are today. You know, the word chemistry reads differently in a research paper than it does in a love letter between my bride and I. And the style of writing makes all the difference in the world. Much of Revelation, you know, it's called apocalyptic literature. You've heard that word apocalypse before. A lot of people think, oh, that means the end of the world. Not necessarily. All apocalypse means is an unveiling, a revealing, a disclosure. It's like you're drawing back the curtain to show more of something. When I used to change my boys' diapers, that was an apocalyptic moment because I had caught a whiff that there was more behind the curtain. And as I pulled back the curtain, there was a full disclosure of what was behind the curtain. The more I think about it, I think it was an apocalyptic moment because some days what was in there really was the end of the world, I thought. A lot of Revelation is God unveiling things for John. He's drawing back the curtain and allowing John to see that there's more going on than what meets the eye. He's reminding him that there's a spiritual world inextricably intertwined with our physical and our material world, that behind all the temptations that may seduce me, behind any kind of persecution and resistance that I may encounter, is a dragon, a beast. And there's a spiritual war going on around me. There's a spiritual war going on within me. And it's meant to be a game changer. I think about the time 200 years ago when surgeons would operate on bodies in the course of battle, going from cadaver to cadaver without ever washing their instruments or sterilizing their hands. And surgery was a high risk. So many people were dying that way. It was a last call. And then somebody developed the microscope. And we began to be introduced to an unseen world, and we began to understand the role of germs and bacteria, and suddenly we began to understand that what was going on visibly was tied to what was happening in the unseen world. And as we began to operate more in light of the unseen world, it began to make more of a difference in the choices we make in the seen world so that we could save some lives. This is the role of the word of the Lord in Revelation. One of the ways that apocalyptic literature does this is with symbols and imagery. You see all kinds of numbers and creatures and metaphors and these coded messages of hope to send to people who are under oppression. I recognize this. I got 3 boys between 11 and 16. They text and they send these coded messages of hope to one another when they're under the oppression of their parents. There's so many acrostics, and it took me a year to figure out what YOLO means. I thought YOLO was a rapper. Then I find out you only live once, and then I find out later, no, there is a rapper named YOLO. So I was right in the beginning. And then they've got these things like emoticons, man. You know what these images and symbols and numbers are in Revelation? All they are is apocalyptic emoticons. Tweet that. That's all they are. And they're sending messages to people that are operating with this kind of imagination and language and world of the Old Testament. And here's the gist of an apocalyptic word like this in a nutshell. It basically says God's in control. He's going to have the last word. Evil's going to be judged. And faithfulness is worth it, even if it costs you your life. Or as our friend Randy Harris summarizes in an outline of Revelation, which everybody knows, the 3 points: Jesus wins. You've got to pick a side. Don't be stupid. Which leads to the final thing to keep in mind. Keep in mind the focus of the writing. It's far more about Jesus than it is about the end of the world. You realize that some scholars say only 12% of all prophecy in the Bible is predictive prophecy in one sense. That a lot of people think, well, isn't all prophecy predictive? Not necessarily. Since you're in Revelation, try this word on for size. Revelation 19 and 10. I want you to see this. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Did you catch that? The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. The spirit of prophecy is not the testimony of the end of the world. The spirit of prophecy is not the testimony of every future event. The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. And that's how Revelation begins, with a revelation of Jesus in all of his glory. And this is exactly where Chris Altrock is about to take us. The very first thing we see in Revelation is a vision of Jesus, not in the humiliation of his crucifixion, but in the exaltation of his resurrection. And they come to find out from the very beginning that the Lion of Judah is far from declawed. He is large and he is in charge. And how large and in charge is he? Well, he's so large and in charge, you read the whole book of Revelation and you find out he doesn't even have a shield. He doesn't need one. And the only sword he has is the one that comes out of his mouth, that is the spoken word of God. And the battle with darkness is as good as done. But some of us have got to be thinking, all right, if that's true right now, I'm still dealing with the darkness. Help me. So try this on for size. I worked a couple of summers for my grandfather on his ranch in Bastrop, Texas. We built barbed wire fence. And one day he took me down to the shed, said, boy, I need you to go in the barn and get some things out of it. He kept this massive rat snake in the barn, and he wouldn't kill it. He kept it in there to deal with all the rodents. And it drove me crazy because I'm scared to death of the snake. I've never been the kind of person that says, oh, look, that snake is poisonous, or that snake is not poisonous. We can pick it up. I don't know how you can tell when your back's to it and you're running the other way. Because that's basically me when I see a snake, you see. And so I go down there. We run into a rattlesnake. My granddad decides to kill that one. He picks up a garden hoe and he chops its head off. And I'm blown away. I think it's the coolest thing in the world. He said, stay there and don't move. And I watched as that severed head began to flop around and that mouth continued to snap for what seemed like another couple of minutes. And he began to explain to me, the snake still has venom in it and can still latch onto you for the next couple of minutes. This is a vision of the enemy. The enemy's head has been severed by work of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But it's still snapping because he's filled with his fury, for he knows that his time is short, Revelation 12 and 9. And our role as believers is to understand that we're dealing with a severed head, but one that is alive for a short season. And we're to operate wisely and not allow it to get the best of us through its lies, through its seduction, through its resistance. So how do you live in the meantime? You live with this vision of Jesus you have in Revelation. And maybe that tells us really what we need to know. Because apparently, maybe what I need more than anything else when I'm dealing with being seduced by the culture, maybe what I need more than anything else when I'm dealing with resistance from the culture is I need a fresh vision of Jesus in all his glory. And apparently Jesus has decided that's what we need. We don't need tips, techniques, advice, legal protection, or political representation near as much as we need to see Jesus. And in Revelation chapter 3, when Jesus stands up and says, behold, I stand at the door and knock, who's he doing that to? He's not doing this to an unbeliever. He's standing at the door of a church and knocks. And there are times when Jesus still stands at the door of us as believers and knocks. And we need to see him yet again. And we desperately need to see him this week, because you and I live in a world where a lot of believers are crying out, look where this world is coming to. And yet John comes along and says, yes, but look at the one who's come into the world and is not yet done with the world. And this is where the story of Scripture leaves us. The last image. And our primary task as followers of Jesus is to witness with my life, with my lips, as to the reality of just how much Jesus is. Which is why you and I need a continual apocalypse. We need a continual unveiling. And the more we focus on Jesus, the more everything else falls into focus. So a couple of weeks ago, I take my family to Honduras for a family mission trip. Honduras is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, only behind Haiti. It's also the murder capital of the Western Hemisphere right now. I knew this when I was signing up for us because we have some missionaries and some work down there in Honduras. But what I didn't know was that the area of Honduras that we were traveling to is the most dangerous area in Honduras. That's the murder capital of the Western Hemisphere. It's the state of Olancho, the town of Catacamas, the neighborhood of Ramiro Lobo. The neighborhood is known as the city of killers because so many children there grow up to be killers in the drug trade of Central America. Americans are left alone in this place. Hondurans, though, are spilling their own blood in the evenings. While I was there, I did a conference for some ministers from different denominations in the area. One of them had just witnessed the murder of 3 people in her front yard. And over the last 13 years, our church has been down there in this particular part of Honduras building homes. We've built about 80 600-square-foot homes just working on this little neighborhood of Catacamas. Because if you could take a family off a dirt floor, you could reduce the disease rate by as much as 70%. And out of these homes have sprung ladies who have a seamstress business now, which is significant because unemployment is more than 60% in Honduras. Ladies that have catering businesses. And at the center of this is the work of Chip and Lisa Blicker, who are down there that we're supporting. While I was down there, I met a man named Ellie. He's a guitar maker and music teacher. He lost his brother to murder about 18 months ago. In fact, that's a picture that you can see right now of just the bullet holes on one side of the house while his house was barraged with bullets. Ellie was himself a small weapons and arms dealer in Catacamas, illegally, of course, for the drug cartel and for anybody who needed to defend themselves. But in the last year, Ellie has watched his neighborhood, the city of killers, gradually be transformed. And he's a new follower of Jesus Christ. And when he did that, he jettisoned his arms trade. And he got into building guitars because he's a musician, and he began to build guitars, and he launched a music school out of his home, and he teaches music to children and teaches them the gospel. And then when they complete a 6-month course, he gives them their very own handmade guitar. You can see samples of that right now. He does beautiful work. He builds them outside of his little one-room, 600-square-foot home that we had built for him. I was talking to Ellie, and Ellie says one day, I feel crazy following Jesus, particularly with what he says to say about loving enemies and forgiving them. But then he said this: the more I read the Gospels, and the more I see what Jesus said, and the more I see what he did and how he did it, I'm beginning to think Jesus is crazy. He said, Chris, Jesus is so mysterious to me. I find myself drawn to him after all I've been through. He's a mystery, and he's crazy, and yet I can't look away. Following him is hard, but I've never had joy like this. And what's so comical to me about this is Ellie hadn't read the book of Revelation. He's hanging out in the Gospels. He thinks Jesus is mysterious and crazy in the Gospels? Wait till he gets a load of this. And as my wife and I are riding in the flatbed of an old beat-up Chevy about 40 miles an hour down the road, our boys are in the back of this thing. Dust is being kicked up everywhere. We're riding over these rugged streets in Ramiro Lobo. 4'10" Lisa Blicker, the missionary down there, looks at me and says, rather innocently, without a snoop of religious condescension, without any kind of arrogance whatsoever, just innocently, she says, yeah, God's not really using the super religious down here. He's using more arms dealers and hookers. Well, it sounds like Jesus to me. I find it interesting that Ellie is building guitars and teaching music and leading worship, leaving his whole vocation of arms dealing behind, because that's what a bigger vision of Jesus leads to in Revelation. Worship. And the surrender of your life to the point of death. Again, Revelation 19:10, worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Do you realize that even in worship, there is a prophetic declaration going on that is accomplishing something beyond what we see? Ellie being captivated by the vision of Jesus does for me what Revelation does for me. I've found that in my own life, when I've been too timid to share my faith, when I have been too tranquilized by trivial matters, when I've been too addicted to sin, and I've been in a spiritual slump, it's because I've lost my big vision of Jesus. I've had too small a vision of Jesus. Ellie's become an arms dealer of a different kind. He's still dealing in weapons and arms. They're just different. And make no mistake about it, they're weapons of mass destruction. His weapons of generosity, his weapons of praise, his weapons of music, his weapons of peace, his weapons of joy. They're weapons of mass destruction, and that city of killers is being transformed into a city of life. When Jesus came knocking on the door of Ellie's heart, Ellie came and got it. And perhaps that's our cue too, that this week, Jesus comes knocking on the door of the church. Let's get the door. And let's get the picture. And the church said, Lord, I pray grace upon this word. Will you water what's been sown? And to the extent that I've said things that aren't in line with who you truly are, born out of my own fallibility, my own ignorance, I pray they would fall to the ground, and that which I've said that's true to who you are, revealed in your word, confirmed by your Spirit, would stick and bear fruit 100-fold through Christ.